Welcome to the deep dive, everybody. Today we're going way back in time, back to 12th century England, to explore this incredible place called Fountains Abbey.
Oh yeah, Fountains Abbey.
And we've got all this awesome research and historical accounts. They really bring this monastery to life,
It's amazing how much we actually know.
Yeah. But you might be surprised to learn that these monks, they were all about simplicity, austerity even. But get this, they ended up the richest monastic order in England.
Yeah, it is kind of a head scratcher when you think about it, right?
So how'd they pull it off? What can their story tell us about life way back then in medieval Yorkshire? Let's dive in.
Let's do it.
So what I find really interesting about Fountains Abbey is it kind of flips the script on what we think about monastic life. Like we picture monks as these quiet, secluded figures, right?
Yeah, tucked away, hidden from the world, yeah.
But Fountains Abbey was like this bustling center of activity.
Right, totally woven into the community.
Yeah, a major player in the whole region's economy too.
Like essential to the whole area.
Okay, so let's paint a picture for everyone. It's 1132. We got this group of Cistercian monks who wanted a stricter, simpler way of life. So they left their monastery in York. They head out and found Fountains Abbey. They were all about austerity, ditching the fancy robes for plain wool, and totally devoted to prayer and hard work. You'd think that whole minimalist thing would keep them, well, poor.
You would, wouldn't you?
But here's where it gets wild. Their whole back-to-basics approach, it actually became the secret to their success.
Yeah, the secret ingredient to their wealth.
So their, super simple lifestyle was actually a really good economic strategy.
It was. Think about it. Minimal expenses. So they could put all their energy and profits right back into the abbey.
Oh, I see.
They could expand their land, increase production, that kind of thing.
So they weren't just praying all day. They were like shrewd businessmen.
Oh, absolutely. Land management, agricultural innovation, they were masters.
Wow.
They adopted all the newest techniques, maximizing their yields, turned their estates into these huge productive enterprises.
So like farming experts.
Definitely. Experts.
Yeah.
But their influence, it wasn't just in Yorkshire. In Fountains Abbey, it had connections all across Europe, you know?
Oh, right. Didn't they have ties to,
Clairvaux Abbey in France.
That's it. The mother house of the whole Cistercian order.
That's right. And they even sent monks all the way to Bergen, Norway to set up new communities.
Wow, that's so far.
Yeah, their reach was incredible. It went way beyond just location. Their blend of spirituality and that economic savvy, it spread everywhere.
It's kind of amazing, right? They were all about simplicity, but their impact was anything but simple. They were like reshaping religion in Europe while building this huge economic network.
Like religious entrepreneurs.
Yeah. So let's zoom in on their daily life for a minute. We know they'd wake up before the sun even came up for prayers, then hours of work, study, silent contemplation, simple food. They had to obey the abbot, very few possessions. Man, that's a world away from how we live today.
Yeah, no kidding. No social media, no notifications blowing up your phone, no pressure to buy.
It sounds, I don't know, almost kind of peaceful.
Right. But don't forget, life back then in 12th century Yorkshire, it was brutal.
Yeah, good point.
Tough society, a lot of people barely scraping by, and then there was always the threat of attacks from Scotland.
Right, that's true. So it wasn't all idyllic. So in that environment, I guess Fountains Abbey provided more than just spiritual guidance.
Way more. It became like a lifeline, this beacon of stability in a really uncertain world.
Okay, yeah.
Think of it almost like a medieval social service center.
That's interesting.
They had workshops, a mill to grind grain, guest houses for travelers. They even cared for the sick and the poor. All the while, they're offering this spiritual haven.
It's all coming together now. And that's even reflected in their architecture, isn't it?
Oh, for sure.
They started with basic timber structures, right? But as they got wealthier, more influential, they built these amazing stone buildings.
Like they got grander as they went along.
Yeah, it wasn't just about being practical anymore. It was a statement,
Oh, yeah. Their church, with the soaring arches and the stained glass windows, it would have been an incredible sight. A symbol of their power.
Right. And it's more than just looks. What about that undercroft?
Oh, the undercroft.
It was huge. Like this massive underground storage area. They had to be self-sufficient, so they needed space to keep everything.
Exactly. Smart planning. Thinking ahead.
So even though on the surface, it seems like their simple living and their grand architecture clash, it actually all makes sense when you understand their economic model.
Yeah, reinvest, expand, build a legacy. That was the plan.
Yeah, I get it. And that legacy went beyond the abbey walls.
Oh, absolutely. It had a huge impact on the whole community, the whole region.
Yeah, let's dig into that more after the break. We'll explore how these monks, dedicated to a simple life, became major players in the economy of medieval Yorkshire.
Sounds good. I'm ready when you are.
So before the break, we were talking about how those Fountains Abbey monks, they took a vow of poverty, but ended up super wealthy.
It's wild, isn't it?
I mean, they were really good at managing land, they knew agriculture, and they were pretty sharp businessmen.
Yeah, real savvy bunch.
But let's talk about how all that economic activity,
Yeah.
affected medieval Yorkshire. You might not believe it, but those monks, who were supposed to be all quiet and contemplative, they were big players in the economy back then.
Yeah. It kind of throws you for a loop when you think about it. We tend to picture monasteries as, like, totally separate from the daily grind, but Fountains Abbey, oh, they were right in the thick of things.
So how did their economic activity, how did that actually impact the community? We know they had a ton of land. So did they just grow enough to feed themselves, or were they, selling extra?
They did both. They were all about efficiency, remember. Their new farming techniques let them produce a surplus, more crops, more livestock than they needed. And that extra stuff, they sold it at the local markets.
So they were basically helping to keep prices stable by having more food available.
Exactly. And that helped everyone, not just the monks. And speaking of helping, remember we were talking about wool production earlier?
Oh, yeah, they had a lot of sheep, right?
Tons. The Cistercians were famous for their sheep, especially for the high-quality wool they produce.
Right, right. Back then, wool was a hot commodity. People needed it for clothes and all sorts of stuff.
It was huge. And Fountains Abbey, they became a major player in that whole wool trade. Their wool was going all over England, even across to Europe.
Whoa, they were international. So they were feeding people and making clothes. Did all that wool production mean jobs for the local folks?
Oh, absolutely. Think about it. They needed shepherds to watch the sheep, people to shear the wool, spinners and weavers to make it into cloth, and then merchants to, get it all out there.
Like a whole chain reaction.
Exactly. Fountains Abbey's wool operation really gave the local economy a boost, gave people jobs. So their dedication to simple living actually made the local economy more complex.
Yeah, it's funny how that works. It's a great example of how, when the economy is doing well, everyone benefits.
Definitely. And we can't forget all the other stuff that popped up around the Abbey because of all this activity. Blacksmiths for tools, carpenters to build things, stonemasons for those impressive buildings.
They needed a lot of people to help them out.
Exactly. So all those craftsmen and traders, they were doing well too.
It's like the Abbey was this economic engine, driving innovation and encouraging people to start businesses.
Exactly. And it wasn't just about jobs and money either. Think about the infrastructure, the roads, the bridges they built to transport their goods. That helped everyone get around.
Oh, right. And they were masters of water, too.
Totally. Those mills and irrigation systems they built, that probably helped nearby farms, too.
So all those things they were doing to be self-sufficient, they ended up helping the whole community without even meaning to.
You got it. They were improving the lives of the people around them just by going about their business. Their impact went way beyond the Abbey walls.
I mean, let's be real. Life in Yorkshire back then was rough. There was poverty, disease, and that constant threat of, those Scottish raids.
Right. Fountains Abbey was a force for good in a region that really needed it.
This is really changing how I think about monastic life. These guys weren't just praying all day. They were out there shaping their world.
Totally.
They were improving lives through their economy, their work, and their community involvement. I think that's inspiring.
Me too. It shows how choosing a certain way of life can lead to all these positive things you never even planned for.
And how everything's connected. Like how our actions, they have these ripple effects that go way beyond ourselves. Even a place like Fountains Abbey, dedicated to simple living, can play a huge role in the economy and, well, in society.
You said it. They were a special bunch, that's for sure. Okay, but before we get to the fall of Fountains Abbey, let's talk about their bigger role in medieval Yorkshire. I mean, we talked about money, but they were more than just an economic powerhouse, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Back then, the church had so much power and influence. And places like Fountains Abbey, they weren't just religious centers. They were centers of, learning, culture, and social welfare, too.
Exactly.
So they were kind of filling in the gaps, doing all the things that, wouldn't have been done otherwise.
Right. They educated people who couldn't afford it. They took care of the sick. They gave shelter to travelers. They helped the poor. In a society that didn't have all the safety nets we have today, they were essential.
And they kept knowledge alive, too, right? Didn't they copy and preserve old texts?
Oh, absolutely. They had these rooms called scriptoria where the monks would painstakingly copy manuscripts.
That must have taken forever.
I know, right? But it was so important. Without them, we might have lost a lot of classic literature and learning.
It's like they were guarding history,
Yeah.
making sure knowledge could be passed down.
They were a bridge between the past and the present.
It's amazing how much they did while still living this simple life. They were shaping the economy, helping people, protecting knowledge, and all while staying true to their faith. It's incredible.
They were truly remarkable, but sadly, it couldn't last forever. Fountains Abbey had its share of troubles even before it closed down during the dissolution of the monasteries.
Right.
Even with all their success, they couldn't escape those medieval hardships, bad harvests, economic downturns, and of course those pesky Scottish raids.
All those things must put a strain on their resources.
Absolutely. And then came the Black Death, that horrible pandemic in the 14th century. It swept across Europe and, I imagine, hit Fountains Abbey pretty hard.
It must have been awful.
So many people died, including the monks and the people who work at the abbey. That loss of manpower, well, it must have been devastating for their farming and their whole operation.
It must have been a terrifying time not knowing what was going to happen next.
It was. And even as they were struggling to recover from the Black Death, there was another problem brewing. Something that would ultimately mean the end of Fountains Abbey and tons of other monasteries in England.
You're talking about the dissolution of the monasteries, right?
Yep.
That happened in 1539, started by King Henry VIII. It was a pretty crazy time in English history. What exactly happened and why?
Well, it was a massive shift, all tangled up with religion and politics. Basically, Henry VIII wanted to break away from the Catholic Church.
Right, he wanted to be the head of the church in England.
Exactly. And that had a huge impact on English society. Monasteries, they were seen as symbols of the Catholic Church's power and wealth, so they became targets. Henry VIII, he needed money and wanted to strengthen his control, so he saw a chance to take their stuff.
So it wasn't just about religion, it was about power and money, too.
You got it. Henry VIII shut down the monasteries, took their land and wealth, and sent the monks away. It was dramatic and often brutal. Can you imagine how that impacted a place like Fountains Abbey? Centuries of tradition, their whole way of life, and their economic activity, all gone just like that.
It's heartbreaking. What happened to all the buildings?
Well, they stripped them of anything valuable, and a lot of the stone was used for other building projects.
Oh, wow.
But luckily, enough of Fountains Abbey is still standing so we can get a sense of how grand it once was. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site now. It's a monument to its history and architecture. But it's also a reminder of how even the strongest institutions can fall.
It's a bittersweet ending to an amazing story. We've talked about the Cistercian monks, their simple way of life, their economic success, all the good they did for their community, and then their downfall. We've covered a lot. But as always with these deep dives, we come away with more than just facts and dates. What are some key takeaways you hope listeners will, take away from all this?
That's a great question. For me, Fountains Abbey shows how individual choices in, the bigger historical picture are all intertwined. We see how these monks who were all about simplicity ended up sparking economic growth and innovation without meaning to. And then how even the most successful places can be wiped out by politics and religious change. It reminds us that history isn't just a bunch of names and dates. It's like a giant tapestry made up of individual stories, all shaped by the times they lived in.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And it just shows how relevant history still is. It helps us understand the present and maybe even learn some lessons for the future. Speaking of lessons, what resonated with you the most as we explored Fountains Abbey? Was there anything that really stood out?
I was really struck by how the Cistercians were able to combine practicality with spirituality. They weren't just these mystical thinkers. They were skilled farmers, builders, businessmen. They understood hard work, innovation, and working together, and they used their economic success for good, to help their community, care for people, and share their faith. It's actually pretty similar to modern ideas of social entrepreneurship and sustainable living.
I never thought about it like that. We think of monastic life as being so separate from the material world. But the Cistercians at Fountains Abbey, they found a way to make it all work together. It makes you question things, doesn't it?
It does. It shows that spirituality and practicality don't have to be opposites, and maybe we can learn something from them even today.
I like that. Okay, before we wrap up our deep dive into Fountains Abbey, I want to leave our listeners with a thought. Imagine you could travel back in time, walk through those halls when the Abbey was at its peak. Picture the monks singing, the light pouring through the stained glass windows, the smell of incense. Imagine the workshops bustling, the travelers finding refuge, the sick being cared for, and the monks working the fields. What would it feel like to be part of that community? What could you learn from their way of life?
And as you're picturing that, think about this. What echoes of Fountains Abbey can you find in your own life? Maybe it's your dedication to a cause, your involvement in your community, or your desire to live a meaningful life. Fountains Abbey might be gone, but its story still speaks to us. It offers inspiration and lessons for anyone who wants to understand what it means to be human.
That's perfect. And until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been on this pretty incredible journey, haven't we?
We have.
From those humble beginnings of Fountains Abbey all the way to its rise as this, like, powerhouse in medieval Yorkshire. Religious, economic, you name it.
It really did have it all.
But, as they say, all good things. So before we took a break, we were talking about some of the tough times that Fountains Abbey went through, like the Black Deaths, for example.
Right, right.
But now let's get to the thing that really sealed its fate, the dissolution of the monasteries. This all started in 1539 with King Henry VIII. A pretty wild time in English history. Can you tell us what went down and why?
Yeah, for sure. The dissolution of the monasteries was a huge deal. Lots of religious and political stuff swirling around. Basically, Henry VIII, he wanted to split from the Catholic Church, you know?
Yeah, he wanted to be the top dog of the church in England.
Exactly. And that had massive repercussions across, like, all of English society. Monasteries, they were seen as these strongholds of Catholic power and wealth. So they became targets. Henry VIII, well, he needed cash and wanted more control, so he saw an opportunity.
So it wasn't just about religion then. It was about power and money, too.
It was a combo platter. Henry VIII just shut down the monasteries, took all their land and riches, and kicked the monks out. It was pretty ruthless. Imagine what it was like for a place like Fountains Abbey. Centuries of tradition, their whole way of life,
Yeah.
the economic activity, poof, gone.
It's sad when you think about it.
Yeah.
What about the buildings themselves? What happened to those?
Well, they took anything valuable, and a lot of the stone, they used it for other building projects.
Oh.
Luckily, we still have enough of Fountains Abbey left to give us an idea of how magnificent it was. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site these days. It's a testament to its history and architecture, but it's also a reminder that even the strongest things can crumble.
Yeah, it's a bittersweet ending to a really incredible story. We've talked about the Cistercian monks, their whole simplicity thing, how they got so rich, all the good they did, and then, well, their downfall. It's been quite a deep dive. But like we always say, we come away with more than just facts and figures. What are some of the big takeaways you hope our listeners get from this exploration of Fountains Abbey?
That's a good question. For me, Fountains Abbey shows how individual choices and these like bigger historical currents, they're all tangled up. We see how these monks who were all about simple living, they ended up jump-starting economic growth and innovation, and they weren't even trying. And then we see how even the most successful places can get swept away by the tides of politics and religion. It reminds us that history isn't just, names and dates. It's this tapestry of stories, all shaped by the times they happened in.
That's beautifully put. It shows how history is still so relevant today. It helps us make sense of the world now and maybe even learn some things for the future. Speaking of learning, what really stood out to you as we explored Fountains Abbey? Was there any story that really grabbed you?
I was really struck by how the Cistercians were able to blend practicality with spirituality. They weren't just these airheaded mystics. They were skilled farmers, builders, businessmen, the whole nine yards. They got hard work, innovation, and the importance of community. And they used their success to do good, It's like a model for, I don't know, social entrepreneurship or sustainable living, even today.
I never thought of it that way. We tend to think of monastic life as being so detached from the world, but the Cistercians at Fountains Abbey, they really found a way to bring it all together. Makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. It shows that spirituality and practicality aren't always at odds. And maybe there's something we can all learn from that, even in today's world.
I love that. Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into Fountains Abbey. But before we go, I want to leave everyone with a thought. Just imagine you could travel back in time, walk through those incredible halls when the Abbey was at its peak. The monks chanting, the light coming through the stained glass windows, that smell of incense in the air. The workshops buzzing, travelers finding a safe place, the sick being cared for, monks tending their fields. What would it be like to be part of that? What could we learn from their way of life?
Yeah. And as you picture that, think about this. What echoes of Fountains Abbey can you find in your own life? Maybe it's your commitment to something bigger than yourself, or your work in your community, or just wanting to live a life that means something. Fountains Abbey might be gone, but its story, it still has something to say. There's inspiration and lessons there for anyone who wants to understand, well, what it means to be human.
I couldn't said it better myself. So until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.